Crusader Spirit Series was one of the biggest CitizenCon announcements, so given that was a good few weeks ago, you could say I'm slow off the mark. But as with all new concept ships, I prefer to leave the teabag in to brew before coming out with any form of review. The Q&A's now been released and we've had a bit of a clear up on the ship's measurements and specs, so I'm thinking they're now ready for a bit of a dive. So grab yourself a beverage while I roll the intro, and then we'll get into it. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Loudguns, and today, like I said, we're going to do a bit of a dive into the new Crusader Spirits. And before I really get into this, it's time for the standard disclaimer slot. The Spirits are concept ships, so there's zero guarantee as to when, if you buy one, you'll get your little mitts on it. And anything expressed by CIG in the info that they've released as part of the data should be taken with a pinch of salt. It's a guide and it could change when the ship is complete. And even after ships are released to flyable, they could be changed for balance reasons, and as things like the flight model get updated. Also, you don't need to go and buy anything more expensive than a basic starter pack, which comes with an Aurora or a Mustang. That's all you really need to get playing Star Citizen, and eventually all of these ships will be available to buy for credits in the game. If you are thinking of getting into SC, I'd highly recommend purely starting with a starter pack. Do just make sure that when you set up an account you use someone's referral code. If you've got a mate who plays, please use theirs, but if not, mine's up on screen. Disclaimer time over. So the Crusader Spirits come in three flavours: the C1 cargo variant, the E1 executive passenger transport, and the A1 bomber. Each one of these is a complete standalone ship, so a key point to get off the bat is that you won't be able to retrofit your C1 with the bombing module and turn it into an A1 later. The C1 retails at $110, putting it firmly in line with the Drake Cutlass Black at $100 and the Misk Freelancer also at $110. The E1 will set you back $150 and the A1 $175. First up, let's take a look at where these ships are similar to one another, namely in terms of size and for the most part specifications. Then we can verge off and take a look at the individual differences of the platforms. All of the Spirits are 46.5 metres long with a width of 43.5 metres. The profile is sleek with a height of just 10 metres. And while these ships might have quite a stealthy look as a result, CIG do remind us in the Q&A that signature is more down to IR and EM outputs, which are determined entirely by components. Cross-section does play a part, so if you're going straight towards someone or running straight away from them in a Spirit, you might be able to reduce your signature. But just don't think of these as stealth ships. None of the Spirits have a docking collar, and all of them rely on a single point of entry, the ramp at the rear of the ship. All versions target a crew of 2 with a pilot and a co-pilot who can utilise the rear turret. And by default the pilot has control over the primary weaponry, which consists of 2 fixed size 3 wing-mounted weapons and a dual size 3 nose gimbal, housing size 2 weaponry. The Q&A noted that if desired, the co-pilot could take control of the forward weaponry. There's a rear turret mounting on all of the Spirits, and on the E1 and A1 this houses another pair of size 2 guns, while on the more utility-focused C1 this is a size 3 tractor beam. Components are the same across all variants, with the majority being singular size 2s. This goes for the power plant, QT drive, QT fuel tanks, hydro tanks, shield generator, shield emitter, cooler, radar, scanner and computer. All ships have the same crew living arrangements with a shared sleeping area for 2, a small kitchen and washroom. That was a bit of a mouthful, but you get the general idea that, much like the Atlas platform, we're looking at the same chassis being used for a variety of purposes. For the most part it's what's inside that counts, so let's split them out and look at that individually. So first up is the C1, the freighter variant. The bulk of the ship is turned over to a cargo hold with 48 SCU of capacity, putting it dead even with the Drake Cutlass and 18 SCU short of the Freelancer's 66. The C1 is also the only Spirit variant that's designed to fit vehicles, although I'm pretty sure some of the people out there are going to make vehicles fit into all of the others. The dev's guide for a Cyclone or smaller. and I know a lot of people will be looking at the C1 wondering if they should replace their cutty with it. So considering one of the key activities people go about with these existing ships, I'm a little bit annoyed that it's rarely specified whether these vehicles will accommodate a rock mining buggy. The rock is smaller than the Cyclone in all of the measurements apart from height. It's a mere 15 centimeters taller, at 3.15 meters versus 3.0, but coming in up a ramp that could make all of the difference. So personally I think it's likely the C1 will accommodate your rock, but just to be clear that's not a sure thing based on the Q&A answers. Also, like the Cutty Black, the C1 has a tractor beam, which should assist in the shifting of cargo, particularly after we get that physicalised with the refactor. The size 3 tractor on the C1 is meaningfully larger than the size 1 on the Cutty though. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet, but I think it's not too much to assume bigger equals higher power, probably capable of moving larger mass items over bigger distances. The E1 is billed as an executive travel craft, aimed at shorter journeys for VIP passengers. I say shorter journeys because while you'll find comfortable seating for up to 6 guests, this variant of the Spirit doesn't have any extra beds versus the others, so you still only have sleeping arrangements for the 2 crew. The accommodation is split over 2 levels with a set of lockers and a guest washroom on the same level that you enter the ship, while the cabin itself sits above as a kind of mezzanine level. Passengers seemingly benefit from comfortable seating, sizable flat-screen TVs and huge panoramic windows. It also looks from the concept art like each of these seats has a sliding doorway, so they should be able to be sealed off to give guests privacy. The cabin is finalised with a top-of-the-line Mixmaster drinks machine. I might have missed some previous inside joke, but this seems to have got some members of CIG and the community pretty excited. The fact that the drinks maker is described as fully automated though indicates that maybe you as the crew might not need to worry too much about waiting on your passengers and just get on with flying the ship. As mentioned before, the E1 has a rear-facing turret rather than the tractor beam, since you're probably more worried about keeping your passengers safe than unceremoniously beaming them aboard. It's worth noting from the Q&A that the turrets are purely rear-facing, so you can't use them to add to the power of the ship's other weaponry. You've got 2 completely separate firing arcs. And finally we have the Spirit A1, the bomber variant. Contentious topic I know, but personally I love the bombing gameplay in Star Citizen, and I've had quite a lot of fun recently dialing in my abilities with the A2. But it has left me wanting a smaller, more manoeuvrable bomber, which might be better able to support ground operations without catching your own Novas and Centurions in any potential blast radius. In the A1, the cargo hold makes way for a set of bomb racks housing 10 size 5 bombs, compared to the size 10 Moabs found on the A2. A couple of questions in the Q&A I think can be welded together to provide a bit more detail on the bombs themselves. So at launch there will be only one type of bomb for the A1, a dumb high explosive. But in the future there might be alternate options that could be swapped out in the same way that missiles can. However, unlike the A2, there are no plans slated for any alternative bomb launchers. The plan I believe is for the A2 to have different bomb racks, so one for cluster bombs which would hold many more smaller bombs as opposed to the current racks which accommodate 4 size 10s. So now we know a bit more detail about these ships, I guess it's time to round out things with a little bit of my own opinion, and I invite you to switch off if you couldn't care less about that. You'll hurt my feelings a little bit, but I can probably take it. Starting in logical order with the C1, I think it's awesome that we're getting more ships in this price range in direct competition with the Cutty Black and the Freelancer. In some of my recent videos I've been banging on a bit about the importance of paying attention to crew requirements. Currently in the verse, due to the complete lack of any real risks, many people cruise around in nearly any ship solo. But I think as we see the game evolve, it's going to become more and more important to pick a ship that you can fully crew with your mates. So more ships that cater to solo and duo players is really cool. And I think in this area the C1 is going to be highly competitive compared to its peers. The Cutlass has the edge on firepower with its turret that can be brought to bear alongside the pilot's weaponry for extra pew pew. The Freelancer has the edge on cargo with its 66 SEU versus 48 for the C1 and the Cutty. But if every other Crusader ship, and this answer from the Q&A is anything to go by, the C1 is going to have the advantage where I think it really matters, speed and manoeuvrability. As a small scale cargo runner, this to me is where it really counts. You want to get in and out in the shortest possible time. Being faster and speeding up loading with the tractor beam could easily give the C1 an edge over the Freelancer for example, despite its slightly lower cargo space. That said, would I personally buy it? So if you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that my current daily driver is a Drake Cutty Black, so the temptation to take the $10 upgrade is pretty real. But when it comes to concepts, it's always worth paying attention to the Loner's Matrix. This is the ship or ships that you get to play with in the verse right now while you await delivery of your pledge. And for the C1, that loner is none other than the Cutty Black. So if I upgrade, I'd just end up with what I have now, and if I don't like the C1 as much as my faithful Cutty when it releases, I'd have to melt and rebuy a Cutlass, losing my prized $29.49 skin in the process. So the best thing for me to do in this situation is actually to keep my Cutty, but pick up a $10 CCU from the Cutty to the C1 just in case. When the C1 comes out, I can give it a spin by borrowing a friend's and see if I like it. I can even just wait for the next patch and buy myself one in-game with AUEC before pulling the trigger. However, if I decide after having tried it that I don't want to betray my Drake roots, I can always just keep my Cutlass and melt the CCU for my $10 back as store credit. I'd probably then just use that to buy more orange armour if I'm being honest. The E1 and the A1 are trickier, so full disclosure time, I may have gone completely against my own advice and had a little self-control issue during CitizenCon, and there might be an E1 living in my hangar. Justification time, I personally loved passenger transport gameplay in Elite Dangerous. There's just something about that sort of loop that can be cathartic, hopping around the verse, and particularly with the fidelity of the SC universe, I think this could have some really interesting potential. But for this niche I was never quite certain about going for something as big as the Genesis Starliner, so when this smaller option came up I took it. I also really like the idea of being a passenger on board this ship as well. If I'm running operations for Frontier, I quite like the idea of being driven around, so if anybody would like to be my chauffeur, I am open to applications. That said, all of this could be me trying to justify this to myself, and the real reason could have a lot more to do with CitizenCon hype and the 2 gin and tonics I'd had before digging around for my debit card. Anyway, for now at least, I've got a Cutlass Steel as the loner to console myself with. The A1 is probably the most niche of the spirits in my opinion. Do you like dropping explosives on stuff is arguably the most important question to ask yourself here. It also gets a bit more complex at this point since we are talking about a decidedly higher pricing point at $175. The other note of caution I have really is that while the A2 provides a decent example of how bombing can function in Star Citizen, we don't have many great examples of what you would want to bomb and why. We recently took a run at Jumptown as an org, and bombing it is one of the most effective ways to clear out an occupying enemy org, taking out any vehicles and personnel that are on the ground, softening it up for sending in your ground forces. But this is just one very limited use case that we've seen so far. There's just not enough flesh on the bones of the gameplay for me to decide whether or not the A1 offers great value at this point. From the Loner Matrix you'll pick up a Freelancer Miss as your loner. All this being said, with the obvious caveats of not needing to buy any ships other than your starter, it's your money. You earned it, stole it, or maybe your uncle sold some bored apes at the peak of the NFT craze and cut you in on the proceeds. However you got it, it's yours to decide what to do with it, so don't let anyone, me included, tell you how to spend it or not to spend it. So, thanks very much for watching the vid. I hope it was a relatively quick and interesting insight into the Spirit series and saved you a little bit of reading. Let me know down in the comments what you reckon. It's always great to hear different opinions on things like this. And that's one of the things I like doing before making these sorts of videos. Just chatting and reading lots of different views over on the Frontier Discord. The link's just in the video description down below if you fancy popping in to say hi. And if you think I've earned it, then consider hitting like and subscribe. There's a bit of everything on the channel and I really appreciate all your support. I did my first live stream a couple of weeks ago and I'm going to try my best to make this a fortnightly thing. So if you've got some spare time on Sunday afternoon, I'll be going live doing some chilled out activities and taking any questions you bring me here on this channel from 6 PM UTC. And the VOD will be up shortly afterwards on the new Frontier Consolidated channel, which is linked in the video description. So with all that said, thanks very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.